Beyonce's song Freedom, heard here in some Donald Trump campaign content, might lead to a lawsuit.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox, and welcome to 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. It is day 68. That means there's 68 days until the election. On this show, we talk to smart people about the campaigns, about what's jumping out to them in this insane and historic time in American politics. And that's why I want to talk to our guest, Kevin Kruse, who is a professor of history at Princeton University, specializing in the history of American politics, history of conservative politics, even more specially, and author of the New York Times bestseller, Myth America, I Hate You, Kevin. Historians take on the biggest legends and lies about the past. So, and we're going to be talking about some of that. But the first question I have for you is, as a historian and just person in the world, like, what's a thing that's been interesting to you about the election, the campaigns, like these past few days?
For me, the really interesting thing has been, it's the big story of the election, the remarkable transition that the Democratic Party has made, right? And not just in terms of pulling off what many people, me included, thought would be kind of an impossible late transition to switch from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. They pulled it off with a kind of impressive level of skill. I'm used to kind of Democrats finding a way to fumble the ball whenever they can, and the handoff was amazing. But it wasn't just they switched candidates, they really switched gears in terms of how they're thinking about this election, right? So Joe Biden had framed the election as a defense of democracy. And I think that's absolutely right. I think there's no hyperbole in the claims he made about the election kind of being, democracy is on the ballot. And it's a stark problem that I think we've all got to confront. But what Harris did was shift it from a theme of democracy to a theme of freedom, right? And so it's less about our democracy is at risk and more about here's what you're going to lose because our democracy is at risk. Here is what your freedoms are on the line, right? And I think it's a more visceral way to put the stakes of the election. The mistakes of the election, as Jay Rosen keeps reminding us, are really what this is all about. There's a tendency to get caught up with the horse race, who's ahead, but really what matters here. And so I think that shift that Harris has embodied, and the Democratic National Convention was all about freedom. And it's not just because Beyonce has provided a new theme song for the Harris campaign, but it really is the theme of the campaign. And it's not just that they've leaned into freedom in obvious ways. And I think any presidential candidate would have done this because of what the Trump administration and the judges they put in place and the state legislatures they've enabled have done to attack fundamental rights, right? Voting rights, reproductive rights. There's a lot that has really been eroded in the last few years, and it's natural, I think, for Democrats to rally around it. But whereas Biden had rallied around a defense of these rights as being part of this support of democracy, you could tell his heart wasn't really in it, right? So reproductive rights. He's an old white Catholic, right? And he's pro-choice, but you can tell he's not quite as invested in this as, say, a younger woman is, right? And so what Harris has done has moved the issue of freedoms up to the forefront, but in a really capacious language, right? It's not just even a return to what I think Democrats would have seen as a fight for freedom in the late 90s before Bush and the Republicans hijacked freedom as kind of the target of the war on terror. It used to be Democrats would talk about freedom in a very kind of straightforward way. It's the freedom to do things, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to live your life without the interference of the government. And that's a crucial part. And I think Harris has really leaned into that. But she's gone back even further, right? I think she's gone back to the way in which Franklin Roosevelt used to talk about freedom, right? If you think about World War II, the four freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, okay, and kind of a way we'd understand them now, but also freedom from want, freedom from fear, right? And so if you look at the way in which they talked about freedom in the convention, it was both these freedoms of individual rights, but also the government should do things to guarantee that you've got a certain set of safeties and securities in your life that you're free from all these worries, right? And so it really is a really impressive, capacious understanding of freedom that they've gone back to. And so that's a real huge shift in the Democratic Party that has taken place in just a month. It's really remarkable.
I was going to ask you if this emphasis on freedom in the Democratic Party came before or after the Beyonce song, but I guess I'll give credit to the Harris campaign for going to the Beyonce song.
I mean, yeah, it's a chicken or egg conundrum. We'll have to get some tell-alls from the Harris campaign. It might have been that they were inspired by the song. Fine, that's great. But wherever it is,
but they did switch to it, and I think that's a really important movement to freedom. I think that's important for the reasons you're talking about. I think, Hillary Clinton talked about the same kinds of threats to democracy, and it was motivating to a certain sector of the Democratic base.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people who are traditionally in the Big Ten of the Democratic Party who are like, yeah, democracy's never really worked out that well.
Right.
Like, the promise of democracy has been like a little bit iffy for like whole sections, right? Yeah. Women, people of color, poor people, and immigrants, for instance. And I think what you're saying grabs at that entire base. And the astonishing thing for me, I think one of the biggest sort of phrases said from the podium at the convention was Tim Walz saying that housing and healthcare are human rights.
Yeah.
Like, that is something that activists have been agitating for decades.
Right. And again, it fits with this idea of freedom. You should have housing. You should have access to food. You should have basic fundamental issues. Again, it's the way in which the New Deal understood freedom and security as intertwined concepts, right? You can't be free unless you are secure in certain basic concerns, right?
And I think that's where the idea of reproductive justice and reproductive freedom have informed the entire conversation, right? Because it's intuitive to a lot of people, because women have, been able to make big strides in leadership in the Democratic Party, including the candidate, to be able to make the argument that women are not free or equal unless they can control their bodies. Right. And I think it's a very natural step from that to people cannot be free and equal unless they have their basic needs met. Okay, so we've talked about how that language of the New Deal has informed this conversation. Let's turn our lens to the other party and talk about how the language and ideas that are forefront in the Trump campaign also have roots in American history, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they're a little less savory, but like with it, for instance, with Project 2025, they have a very specific vision of what America they want to return to as well. You're an expert on this particular history.
Yeah. And this is really what's remarkable about Project 2025 is I almost said the genius of the Trump campaign. Well, the appeal, the effectiveness of the Trump campaign is that they aspire to a greatness that they never define, right? Make America great again. Okay, so there's some kind of return back here, right? Specifically when you try to nail them down on when exactly was America great, it's a period, again, to dovetail back to your point about the Democratic Party, people in the base thinking they've never had full democracy. They look back to a period in which democracy was certainly restricted. And I think we understood this in the first Trump term, largely through racial lenses, right? This is an era in which America was technically religiously diverse, but very much in the kind of Judeo-Christian tradition that people like Dwight Eisenhower kind of invented and promoted. And so you don't have to worry about Muslims or other scary religions that are different, but also racially homogenous, right? They never quite vocalized that, but the America of the 1950s that they wanted to return to was a largely segregated nation in law or custom through much of the country, and that's how they defined it. Well, the addition of J.D. Vance has put a different spin on what making America great again would be, and it is a return to, it's partially a return to a 1950s vision of what women should be, but it's even more distorted than that, right? He's got this idea. He recently said that, he doesn't trust teachers who don't have children We used to fire teachers when they had children, right? We used to assume that you couldn't be a good
When
teacher if you had your own children. Female, sorry, yes.
Female teachers had children.
Right, yes. Again, this, if you look back through all these things I've mentioned, the underlying theme here is that the rules didn't apply for white men, right? And so it's restrictions, white Christian men. It's restrictions against all these other different groups. And that is essentially what they want to make America great again, right? It is all about reestablishing. There's always been a certain level of yearning for order and structure in modern conservatism, but it's really pronounced with the Trump folks, right? They really do want a society in which the rules apply to the little people at the bottom, and those at the top are free and exempt.
I want to drag out a little bit something that I know you're also an expert on, something you also study, which is the Christian thread of that history, which I do feel like is more pronounced in this election for the Republicans. And that's also what J.D. Vance brings to the ticket, is a specifically white evangelical Christian vision. And I think it has to be really specific that it's white evangelicals, you know, and that is the vision that sort of encompasses all the other rules and regulations, right? Is putting forward that this is what you have to do. Like when they talk about normal families, when they talk about having children, it is a Christian vision. And it's tied up, like, I mean, I guess I want you to talk about how that is even like more if this is true, I see of that as more even all-encompassing than simply racism. Racism is a part of that. Racism is threaded through the entire thing. But what they're using to cover all those issues is Christianity, or a specific vision of Christianity.
A very specific vision of Christianity. And we should note here, think about Trump and Vance in terms of their own personal religious journeys, right?
Trump's religious journey. Sorry. It's like...
It's a very short trip. But if you look at who Trump based his religious appeals on, he grew up, if he had a church, it was Norman Vincent Peale's church, a Marble Collegiate in New York City. A feel-good, kind of theologically light religion, but one that really reconciled what, as someone who grew up Catholic, is a basic contradiction, that you can be very wealthy, and that's a sign of that you're very Christian, right? And that was really much one of the kind of the central themes of someone like Norman Vincent Peale, and a reason why the wealthy, like the Trumps, flock to his church, right? It's not a very deeply grounded religion in terms of a command of the Bible. And we saw this in Trump's
2 Corinthians
softball interviews where these religious right broadcasters kept trying to just, hey, what's your favorite Bible verse? What do you like more, the New Testament or the Old Testament? That is T-ball set up for anyone. If you're talking to an evangelical, the answer is the part with Jesus in it. That's the book you pick. He couldn't even do that. They're both great, right? He doesn't know anything about the substance here, right? But, and Vance is a very different version. Vance went hard all in as an adult a convert to Catholicism. Speaking as a lifelong Catholic, those people who do it at a late stage, especially political conservatives, latch on to a view of Catholicism most of us got rid of centuries ago, right? It's a very traditional version of Catholicism. There's a great meme on social media of, lifelong Catholics think, hey, we should probably feed the poor, right? Adult Catholic converts who are traditional Catholics say things like, oh, well, the letter of Antinomian in 1935 says that birth control is clearly a violation of the Bible, right? That's the weird level that we get into, right? So Vance is hyper-specific on a certain type of conservative Christianity. Trump, very vague. And yet they both have key appeal to the evangelical base, even though neither one of them fits with this, right? And it used to be the Republicans tried to convince evangelicals that they were one of them, right? Ronald Reagan did it. George H.W. Bush certainly did it. Mitt Romney famously ran into problems with this as a Mormon. But what Trump did was he said, look, I'm a baby Christian in the excuses they gave him, but I'm going to deliver for you what you want, right? It was very much a transactional relationship with them. And the Trump campaign was saved in 2016 by the meeting he had at Trump Tower with all those evangelical leaders, in which he provided them a list of judges he would nominate to the Supreme Court who would overturn Roe v. Wade. And they got what they wanted. They got 3 justices there and several other judges at the lower level. And they've really kind of finally, they're the dog that caught the car. And now they're they don't know what to do, right? Because they finally got what they want. And so we're going to see how well this coalition holds together.
I mean, don't they just want a second car? Like, I mean, to
Oh,
me,
yeah.
that's what Project 2025 looks like, is that
Yeah.
they're the, maybe not second car, but they're the dog that caught the car and now they want to drive the car. Like, they have
This metaphor may
realized,
fall apart, but
they have realized what a pushover Trump is once you get him in office.
yeah.
And
But
so
the thing is
they've
that-
increased their ask for
Yes.
even more, conservative policies, for even more retrograde policies.
Yeah, you're going to see, and it follows the logic. Once you chip away at Roe, it's a very quick step to move backwards in time from what set up Roe to go against Griswold, to make contraception bans legal again in several states, to do all sorts of things that would be invasive, to have a level of government monitoring of women's reproductive activities in a way in which would have been inconceivable before technological changes, right? And now there's a level of scrutiny and state meddling that I think we haven't even thought about before, because we thought we were past it.
There is Trump saying you're never going to have to vote again, which I think Trump says a lot of shit that he doesn't even really know what it means.
Yeah.
And I think it is in some ways misunderstanding Trump to take him literally. Like, does he really think you're never going to have to vote again?
Mhm.
I don't know if he actually believes that. I don't know if he actually believes he's setting himself up as king,
Yeah.
right? But what he is doing is intuiting the actual goal.
Yeah.
Because, and this is a thing, I feel like this is another thing the Democratic Party feels like it's finally, like the leadership is finally kind of like clicked in their mind and finally talking about, which is the restriction on voting rights being the end of democracy.
Right.
Like that, what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in Texas, like we are creating a situation that will empower a permanent conservative Christian white supremacist rule. And you know that. I mean, we had that happen once.
Yep. I mean, this goes back to our point about a lot of people on the Democratic side know they've never had full democracy.
Right.
We as a country have only really had full democracy since the Voting Rights Act of 65, and that's already been badly eroded by the Shelby County decision. So we had about 60 years of a good run of being a full democracy.
Okay run.
An okay run. I mean, it's the best we've done.
Yes,
let's put it that way. Okay, it's the best we've done.
Agreed.
We were becoming a more perfect union. I think we could argue that. And the wheels have come off. And it's come off because of the naked contempt that a lot of conservatives have for democracy, right? You often hear this phrase, we're a republic, not a democracy. And we have to remember that's something that was invented by the far fringe right. That is a phrase that was pushed into public discourse by the John Birch Society. The people who thought fluoridation was a communist plot, the people who thought Dwight Eisenhower was secretly working for the Soviet Union, they're the ones that gave us this phrase. And if that introduction doesn't show you how stupid it is, let me point out that a constitutional republic is a subcategory of democracy. So when someone says, we're a republic, not a democracy, it's like saying, that's not a car, that's a Honda Civic. Deeply wrong.
it's been a while since I was in school, but my understanding is kind of that republic as a representational form of democracy is actually like, we want to expand that a bit, right?
Yes.
Like a republic is like when we don't have direct election of senators.
Right.
We've decided as a country, or certain parts of us have decided, that we want more direct democracy and less Republican stuff, right? So that is a phrase that got invented in a way, it is a phrase that encompasses voter suppression.
Yeah.
Right? Because it wants to take away votes from the masses.
Right. And they've been clear about this. Again, from 1980, you can find, there's a great speech that Paul Weyrich gives. You can find it online on YouTube. Search for this. He calls them goo-goo voters. Good government voters. Not like I'm from Nashville. Goo-goo is a candy there. But good government voters. He goes, I hate good government voters. The ones who think we want everyone to vote. I don't want everyone to vote. He says quite clearly. And this is not some secret recording. This is a speech he gives to Republicans. The more people vote, the more diluted our votes are, he says. And so we want fewer people to vote. And that's the motive behind all of this. All of the bullshit about voter fraud, they have investigated this. Again, we memory hold this, but Trump got Chris Kobach into the White House to head a giant commission where he was going to find the 3 to 5 million bits of fake votes that were out there that Trump believed had happened in the 2016 election. Couldn't find them. In fact, the few cases of voter fraud we find are generally from Republicans who are doing it because they assume Democrats are doing it as well.
Or they're accidental. Or they're
accidental,
they're
right?
people voting in an incorrect district because they thought they were registered someplace else, or double
and wind
voting.
up in jail for 5 years.
Or they sent in a ballot, absentee ballot, and they voted in person. And those are just few and far between. The Brennan Center did a huge study on this, and they found literally a handful.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not.
And I do
not
mean literally, a number of
like,
votes you could probably hold in your hand.
Yeah. That certainly weren't going to swing a massive national election, right? But this fiction of voter fraud exists so they can implement all these things which shrink access to the ballot. This is why I get so frustrated when I hear people on the far left say, "Oh, voting doesn't matter." If it didn't matter, these people would not be working night and day to take the vote away from you, right? They would not be doing all this stuff with the voter ID, with all kinds of challenges to voter registration. They wouldn't have gone after Acorn. They wouldn't have gone after all these groups that are helping register voters. They wouldn't have had that raid against LULAC in Texas recently, right? There's a reason they're doing this. There's a reason they've got all these lawyers digging in places like Georgia and Arizona. There's a reason they're running for county election officials, because they want to be in control of this. They want to rig this. They want to reduce the vote as much as possible.
And let's be really clear about this, because I think one argument that conservatives make about voter suppression is, we're not doing poll taxes.
Right.
We're not doing poll tests. You can totally vote if you have an ID. It's so easy to get an ID. So, and I have seen studies that the restriction on voting that's caused by voter ID, by requiring an ID, is not at the scale that perhaps we used to think it was. But what is happening is that these things like the LULAC raid and purging voter rolls, what does voter suppression look like today? It looks different than it did in the past.
Oh, absolutely. But in a way, it's still the same thing. Even those things that we now recognize as being racist tools of a Jim Crow society to keep African Americans from voting, things like the grandfather clause, the literacy test, the poll tax, these were all framed as race-neutral good government solutions, right? You should be able to read if you're going to vote. Well, that seems fair, right? Not that they would. Right. It's not basic literacy in practice. It's you've got to memorize and translate a complicated section of the Mississippi Constitution about railroad freight laws, or about the duties of the Speaker pro tem in the state senate. It was micro-targeted stuff like that. And of course, the white registrar was the one who got to decide whether or not you had read that right and understood it correctly, right? On the surface, again, we just want people to be able to read. We just want people to have pay a poll tax and be part of good government. We just want to have kind of a smooth general election. We want to let locals decide this. None of it was set up as, they weren't shouting, we're doing this because we're racist, because that was illegal under the Civil War amendments. So they presented it as good government, right? They presented it as a natural, fair idea, but in practice, certainly worked to limit the franchise. And that's what, again, it's not the same scale, but it's in the same ballpark. What voter ID, what closing polling places, what limiting registration hours, reducing the work of those who are registering voters. Ballot harvesting, that's a brand new thing that they've made incredibly sinister. It used to be that you had a shut-in neighbor who couldn't get to the post office to mail their ballot, and you drop it off for them. Now it's ballot harvesting, and it's a severe crime, right? Again, they're just looking for a way to make the act of voting as complicated and as fraught with potential danger as possible. So maybe there aren't that many people going to jail for accidentally misvoting or doing something wrong with a mail-in ballot, but the threat's out there. And if you can scare enough people away from the polls the way in which they used to with the voter registration laws in the South, then that works just the same way.
And what happened in Florida is a really good example, because I've heard it said by objective pundits, in addition to Republicans, that like DeSantis, look, he's popular. Like he was a squeaker when he came in, but look, he won by this enormous margin. So see, this is what people want. But of course, what happened in Florida is that they made voting incredibly difficult, and they did this literal like squad, like a police squad of to catch people doing voter fraud. And there was a report or a big investigative story that came out of there, I think probably by ProPublica, that interviewed people who were Black, who were like, I'm just not going to risk it.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to I saw the tape on the news of that person getting arrested, and they wound up being innocent, but I don't want to be arrested. Right. I don't want to have to be away from my family for a few days while I'm arrested. I think it's important to point out that these tactics of purging voter rolls, of closing registration, those are the ones that, and closing, making it incredibly difficult to register people, to sign up to register, which is also a thing that's happening in Texas. They do tend to first affect poor people, disabled people, people of color, but that's not that's not the end goal, right? Like that stuff creeps.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we saw the poll tax. One of the reasons a lot of southern states finally did away with the poll tax before it was declared unconstitutional is there were some white politicians who realized, oh, this is actually affecting poor white people too, the people who are in our base, right? And so, yeah, there is a bit of this kind of leopards eating people's faces party approach to this, that once you start to roll back, once you start to infringe and qualify and put asterisk on the right to vote, inevitably it creeps up into where you are, right? And I don't think the people who push this realize that. They always, again, there's a constant strand of kind of Trump-era conservatism of rules for thee, but not for me. They never think that it's going to apply to them, and they're shocked and outraged when it does. Watching Trump go through the criminal justice procedures has really been enlightening. How is this courtroom so crappy? What they're expecting me to do this? Yeah, people have done this their entire lives. Your entire life, they've been dealing with courts. It's just new to you, and now you're outraged because it's affecting a rich white guy. Will
Kamala Harris say in the debate, "I am for felons voting, including you, Donald"? Like,
oh, I hope so. I mean, again, they called out on this a million times that they're upset about felons voting, and he is one. I mean, I think technically he's got to be sentenced to fall into that, but it's a good enough line. Hell, let the Glenn Kesslers of the world fact check that and make that the story. Is Trump really a felon? Yeah, fine.
Or even say, like, should you be sentenced? I would endorse your right to vote.
I endorse your right to vote too, Don. Yeah, I think it's brilliant.
Let's talk about Republicans a little more. JD Vance is weird. He's an odd duck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a feeling of like, all right, we got this odd dude to run against, and who's going to want to vote for the odd dude? But should Democrats be a little more cautious about thinking that being fucking weird is something that people will shy away from as voters?
No, look, I've been very impressed with what Harris has done in the last month. And the thing that has impressed me the most have been all the stories trickling out about how she is basically getting this unsolicited advice from the Democratic strategists who we always see cited in the news, who keep telling her to be safe, to be cautious. Don't go all in on this weird stuff. That's going to be alienating. No, it's good. They are weird. A fever broke across, and it was remarkable, where finally somebody stood up, and it's the emperor has no clothes. And we've known he's had no clothes, but finally somebody just said, no, this is really, I mean, we've all said it, but like at a level of power, this is weird. Like, you're scary, you're dangerous, you're a threat to democracy and all that. But at a fundamental level, you're just weird, right? I mean, Trump in the orange makeup with the cotton candy hair, talking about his daughter and all the creepy stuff he does. And Vance doing some of the same thing, the weird stuff about women and childless cat ladies. It's weird. And it's not that this is an indictment of, I'm weird. It's not an indictment of anyone who is weird in a good way, right? A little quirky, that's fine. I think it's weird in a menacing way, right? It's weird in this should not be in a position of power way, right? And that speaks, I think, directly, not just to Trump and Vance, but all the people who are still in their orbit, right? I saw a thing today. Someone had mocked up an image of the brand new kind of Trump Avengers or whatever. And it was Trump and Vance and Elon Musk and RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. If that's how you're going to push back on the idea of weird, we're teaming up with a guy who chainsawed the head off a whale and Elon Musk. Yeah, great. Good luck with that, right?
Okay, so my concern as someone that for most of my life has seen Democrats, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, is that the weird thing is not enough. Is that the weird thing, I mean, for me it works, and also as someone who lives in Austin, keep Austin weird, love it, and I love weird on many levels. I have said before that I think creepy should be the word, but you know what?
I agree. Yeah.
There is a way that there's a tonal shift in what weird means, and people, I think, know the difference between weird, creepy, and weird fun.
Yeah,
so
I agree. I think creepy is a better term.
But so we can talk about weird,
finessing the message. But I think they're in the right ballpark, right? And I think, and it's not just that weird or creepy would be enough, right? I think you've got to do that. And creepy, I think, works better because it goes into the other line of attack. Again, I've been very impressed with what the Democrats have done here. The Democrats usually have a way, it's summed up by The Onion, Our Dumb Century, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And if you don't know this, it's The Onion has redone. They faked up news coverage throughout the 20th century as if they'd been in print the entire time. And their coverage of the 1980 election is a debate between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. And the Jimmy Carter piece is a classic kind of Democratic, wonky good government policy. It's, let's talk better gas mileage. And it goes on and on about all this. And the Ronald Reagan one is kill the bastards. A very kind of effective, punchy message. And that's usually been the way it's been done. The Republicans come out swinging, the Democrats, raise the accountant's nightshade and the glasses and offer some fine-tuned policy points. It's completely been swung around here, right? We've got the Republicans have Project 2025, where they have done their villain monologue and written it down for everyone to read. And so the Democrats at the convention were able to, Mallory McMorrow bringing out the book and slamming it down, literally citing page numbers and reading it out was a brilliant move, right? And so it's not just, we think you're weird. It's, let's read what you're going to do that is weird and creepy, right? And so it's not just a vague kind of vibe-based attack. They are digging in on the Republican policies, which I think is brilliant.
Right. So I was looking for like an example of how weird has worked in the past, because sometimes I do worry, because I like to worry that weird is a too superficial attack, right? But I think what you're saying, and I think you're right, is that it's not just that you're weird, that you want, like I was talking with Parker Malloy in our last episode about how I think almost every challenge to trans rights ends with saying, I want to look at children's genitals. Like, there is no way you go down the road to attacking trans people that doesn't end with, we're going to need to look at your privates, right? But, and that is not just being weird, and that's just not being like a sex pest. That is an attack on freedom. That is, we inherently understand that as not just weird, but that you are preventing people from having a right to privacy. Right. You are making yourself a predator. And so I think I hear what you're saying, and I think it's correct, which is that these, calling them weird is not just, again, like superficial, you dress funny, you talk funny. It is, your weirdness is a perversion of democracy.
Yeah. Like, and again, I think the Democrats have been smart enough to push this on multiple levels. So the combination with freedom is, I think, an important one, right? And I think Tim Walz hit on this with a very simple, effective line. I love Tim Walz. Mind your own damn business, right? Again, to push back on this is that, again, this is creepy that you're interested in what's going on in the gender of J.K. Rowling, obsessed with the boxer in the Olympics, but more importantly, people obsessed about high school or junior high sports. That's creepy, right? And so mind your own damn business is a really effective pushback on that, right?
Yeah, I think what we're both saying is just true, is that there's a connection between, I'm just going to say it, there's a connection between you fucking couch fucker, like you weirdo, and chance of freedom in USA at the Democratic Convention. Like, it's a little bit of a long journey to take, but like, you weirdo sex pests, your obsession with all these like incredibly personal private things is not just like a thing that bothers me or a thing that creeps me out. It is something that ends with women, people of color, queer people not being considered full humans. Do you want to talk about anything else before we wrap up? Have we missed anything? Is there something cool or interesting or upsetting?
I mean, there's lots of things that are upsetting. I don't think we have enough time to go on. I think we've solved the country's problems here. We're good.
Cool. I think so too. Tell me about the book you're working on.
I'm working on a book right now about the Civil Rights Division in the 1960s. It's told through the lens of John Doerr, who was kind of the point man for the Kennedy and Johnson administrations on civil rights. And I'm excited about the book, and not only a lot of great new details about major civil rights events, the Freedom Rides, the Selma to Montgomery March, things like that, the Mississippi Burning Trial he prosecutes. But it's given me new insights into kind of how our institutions work and how it's important that you have good people in charge of a major government business. So something to keep in mind as we go into this election. It's not just, as weird as much as we want to talk about Trump and Vance and Harris and Walz, it's not just about those people at the top of the ticket. It's about the thousands of federal appointees they're going to make. It's about the people they're going to put in charge at the Department of Justice, at the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, EPA, you name it. There are a lot of government agencies that affect our lives in really important ways, more so than what the president or vice president may even say on a given day. And that's what's on the ballot this year.
Kevin Kruse, professor of history at Princeton and author of bestseller Myth America. Historians take on the biggest legends and lies about our past. Thank you so much for joining me. This is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox, day 68. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe and comment. If you are listening to this on a podcast, please rate and review, and know that you can also watch this on YouTube.
Have you ever asked God for forgiveness? I'm not sure I have. I just go and try and do a better job from there. I don't think so.